I see most of the officers of the Wehrmacht as not necessarily Nazis in the way that they would, shout Heil Hitler all the time. They were highly intelligent, highly trained, super professionals that ran a very effective war machine. And at one point, more and more of these generals realized that the orders that Hitler were given were not really helping, and they have their men dying because of it. So that creates a lot of tension, and that led to the mistake that Hitler did in Dunkirk, basically. What Churchill called the sickle cut, which was the idea to storm through the Ardennes Mountains and kind of cut off the British and French troops who were still, in the north of Belgium trying to figure out what was going on. Suddenly the Germans are behind them, so that they kind of cut like a sickle into enemy territory, the sickle cut. That was so successful that basically the campaign was won already. So then the Germans invaded, occupied all the cities on the canal back to England to kind of cut off the British completely, so they couldn't, even flee. But there was just Dunkirk was open, the last port that was open, and the German army was they were already on the outskirts of Dunkirk. They could have just taken it and closed that, that hole for the British military to get out. But Hitler then did his famous, and this is all in the dynamic of the Western campaign, a lot of things happen every day, and then they're saying we're gonna have Dunkirk tomorrow and then it's over, and then Hitler stops the tanks. It's his famous Haltebefehl, the order to stop, and they were all on meth, they didn't want to stop, but Hitler was not on meth. Hitler was he basically, it was a little bit similar than Berlin-Munich thing. Hitler didn't really understand that campaign. It was too fast for him. Because they didn't say oh, they're all on meth, they're not going to sleep, they're going to behave erratically. They didn't discuss this. They discussed this in the old-fashioned terms, and Hitler was seeing they do not protect their flanks. What if the British come from the north? This is terrible. Militarily, it was they were already fighting World War II, while Hitler was still fighting World War I, and especially the Allies, they were still fighting World War I. But the tank generals on meth, or the tank generals without meth, the tank generals per se, they were fighting a new type of war. And Hitler then got a visit from Göring, the head of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe. And Göring was a morphinist. That is very well documented. He was on morphine. He was high as a kite most of the time. And that comes with losing touch with reality, I would say. Or at least it changes your grip on reality. Maybe you're still a good decision maker, but it could lead to, if you're intoxicated, let's say you're writing and you're intoxicated, you think it's great, but the next day you read it, it's shit, So Göring was using morphine in the morning, then met Hitler at the Felsennest, which was Hitler's headquarters to command the Western campaign, the Felsennest. And Göring said to him, if the army generals are now going to take Dunkirk, then basically the army has won this campaign. And that will give army high command, which is already against you, because they were, for them, Hitler was always der kleine Gefreite, the small kind of regular army guy, because that's what Hitler had been in First World War. And now suddenly he was the big decision maker. So they thought they make much better decisions than him. So Göring says their power will be so overwhelming that they will from now on call the shots how this war will continue and what will be done next. You should let me, with the Luftwaffe, do the job from the air. The National Socialist Luftwaffe is going to end the Western campaign. So he thought that he could destroy, it doesn't make sense, even destroy the British military with planes. Maybe you can do it, but certainly he couldn't do it. So the tank generals received the Haltebefehl, the stopping order. They didn't believe it when they received it, because the victory, this would have been complete victory over Great Britain. This would have been the end of Great Britain. The whole British military was encircled, but they did get out through Dunkirk. That's why the movie Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan is not good, because he doesn't describe what happened on the German side. It's just this heroic British thing. Yeah, we just got out and we reformed and then we beat, but this was just because Hitler was afraid of the power of his army high command, and convinced by Goering's morphine high vision that he would stop it with the Air Force, which he couldn't. I mean, he bombed, and then the British, they were on ships, and a few ships were sunk, but basically they got out. You need to do this on the ground. At least back then, you would have needed to do it on the ground. So that was a big mistake by Hitler. That's why von Manstein, one of the 3 tank generals from February 17th, was Rommel, von Manstein, and Guderian. And von Manstein, he later said, he spoke of a verlorener Sieg, a lost victory. He said the Western campaign was a lost victory because we really could have achieved the victory. We could have dominated, British. They could have, invaded Britain. There was no more military.
Well, okay, on land,
there was still the Royal Air Force,
and the Navy,
and the Navy. Yeah.
So invading Britain. I think any invasion of actual Britain is a gigantic mistake on the Nazi part.
But if Britain doesn't have a standing army anymore, it's much easier than they still have one.
I think it's still extremely difficult to invade, but it's much easier to sort of neutralize, make sure that that Britain is not a player in the war. I mean,
for sure. Maybe Hitler wouldn't have invaded at all anyhow.
Also because of his sort of not respect, but non-hatred,
right,
of the British Empire.
Because they're also white supremacists. So why would we fight them? It doesn't make sense. While the French, they were already like half black, basically, in Hitler's eyes.
If we're to talk about counterfactual history of the possible trajectories of the war that would lead to Nazi victory, one of the big mistakes is the invasion of Britain. So you already mentioned the mistake with Dunkirk, but beyond that, if they even captured mainland Europe, they could have just neutralized the British threat and not invaded Britain, and then go after the oil, which is much needed maybe in the Middle East. So focus on that campaign before invading the Soviet Union, and then maybe wait for the Soviet Union to invade them through Poland, which would be likely coming, or wait until 1943, something like this, to invade East without the Western Front having to been there. And the other really big mistake is declaring war against the United States, having complete disrespect for the United States and declaring war on the United States, which didn't have to be done at all.
Right.
So it's collecting enemies when those didn't have to be done. So there is, to me, actually, there's a lot of paths there, as dark as it is to imagine, for Nazi Germany to be successful in the invasion of the Soviet Union even.
Well, I think that's why the Wehrmacht officers were pissed at Hitler, because they knew that they could actually win if it was done in a certain way. But Hitler's ideology and his stupidity, and later also the degeneration of his cognitive abilities, did not allow the Wehrmacht to fight in the most effective way. So Hitler was a very bad leader after Dunkirk.